G'day and welcome to the Midweek Wrap, where we stay connected at Valley and think about the world from a biblical perspective. And today we're going to be thinking a bit about the role of the shepherd, and particularly Psalm 23, because this week in Ezekiel we'll be thinking about the shepherds of Israel. But speaking of shepherds, our good friend Ben is not with us today. He's taking a week off, or a week to move house really. So he's planning to move on Saturday, and I don't know if you've seen the weather, but it's not looking great. It is looking like rain all day Saturday. So pray for Ben and Bethany and the kids. Unfortunately, we can't help them move because of COVID, but they have been able to get some removalists to give them a hand. So that's good news. So yeah, be in prayer for Ben. Jordan, thinking about young people, what's happening in the world of youth at the moment?
Yeah, we've got a couple of exciting things to think about and look forward to as far as Valley Youth is concerned. In Term 4, what we usually do, what we've been doing every year, is inviting the grade 6s to come and join us. So come along to see what youth is like in preparation for their first full year next year. So they'll join the younger group at the moment, get the youth experience, get a bit of a taster. So that's happening in Term 4. We'll be looking at the Gospel of Luke, getting a bit of a grounding and foundation in the death and resurrection of Jesus and what the Gospel actually is. So we'd love for all of our grade 6s to come along to that in Term 4. Our Friday meetings are at 7 p.m, so look forward to that, and we'll be giving some more details about that in the next few weeks. One other thing though that's really exciting that we're starting up next term is a Monday night senior youth group. So meeting at about 7 on a Monday night, just the year 10s to 12s.
On Zoom?
On Zoom, yep. Same with the younger, with our regular Friday meetings also on Zoom. This will be on Zoom as well until we can actually meet in person. But the goal for this group with the seniors will be to challenge them in a way that perhaps we can't necessarily fit into a Friday night, to help them to develop skills and gain knowledge that will service them as Christian leaders as they grow and head into life beyond schooling.
That's exciting, George. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's great to be helping our young people moving into leadership and going deeper in their Christian lives.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So yeah, praise God that we've had the leaders put their hands up to make that happen, and we'll be doing that in Term 4.
Yeah, terrific. Psalm 23 is where we are, and if you've got a Bible, it'd be great to look to tune in and have a look in your Bible there. But it starts with this phrase, and it's fairly well known: "The Lord is my shepherd." Now we often go to the word shepherd, but why "the Lord is my shepherd"? If you have a close look, you see the word Lord is spelt in capital L-O-R-D, and it's when it uses the word Lord spelt like that, it's referring to the word Yahweh, the Hebrew word for the Lord. It's a word that God gave them in Exodus chapter 3 verse 1, where God was speaking to Moses and revealed himself, you might remember, at the burning bush. And there he says, I am who I am. It's God's character and identity. It's who God says he is. It's not who we might imagine him to be. And so this is not just any God. It's not a God from any other place. It's the God who spoke to his people through Moses, through Abraham. It's this God that we're talking about. This is the Lord who is our shepherd. And he's our shepherd. Now, the first time the idea that God is a shepherd actually comes up at the end of Genesis, in Genesis 49, where we says, "His bow remained steady and his strong arms stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you." So God is called shepherd right back quite early in the days of Joseph, that God is referred to as shepherd. And so David is kind of looking back and seeing God talked about it as the Lord, his personal God, as his shepherd, caring for him. And he goes on and he says, "I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." And this idea of God's kind of rich provision, it reminds me of God's promises in Deuteronomy 28, where God speaks the blessings that will come to God's people as they walk in his ways, and that they'll live this blessed life, a life that's like this: green pastures, quiet waters, and having his soul restored. And I think this idea of a restored soul, it's the idea of forgiveness and renewal that comes from God when you're aware of your sin, but you are restored and refreshed. Then it talks about right paths, Jordan.
Yeah, that idea of having our soul restored and refreshed, it seems that David is kind of expanding on that a bit. He says that will involve him guiding me in paths of righteousness, in being led in the right way of living for God. Interestingly, even though it's David's soul being restored and refreshed, God's desire in leading David in paths of righteousness is actually his own name, his own name's sake. We see that at the end of verse 3. God's concern for his glory, his desire for his glory, is caught up in his desire to bless David and to lead David in righteousness. And again, interestingly, as we keep reading in verse 4, this guiding in righteousness is actually going to lead David through difficult times. It's going to lead David through, as he says, the darkest valley, or the valley of the shadow of death. There will be evil around him. There will be difficulty, there will be enemies and adversity. But God, as he leads David through this path of righteousness, God will be there with him. It's not God giving him a task to go and do it all on his own. God is there as his shepherd, guiding him and leading him and comforting him. So that idea of comfort kind of comes up at the end of verse 4. The rod and the staff. How do we understand the rod and the staff?
Yeah, well, we sometimes think the rod, maybe it's used to scratch the ears of the sheep or something. But, the rod and staff, it was a comfort because it helped keep the sheep on track. And maybe the shepherd would have to give them a bit of a whack occasionally because the sheep are just about to head off over the cliff or into some dangerous place, and the shepherd kind of give the sheep a bit of a whack. Come on, get in line. And so that's a comfort because you know that when the Lord is using his rod and staff, he's going to keep us on track through his word.
Yeah, and we see, for instance, in Psalm 1, David saying that he delights in God's law, in the discipline and statutes that God has given. It's actually a good thing to have his guidance and his discipline.
Yeah. And then he goes on, verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. David has his enemies, and we know that well but even in the presence of his enemies, he's aware that when God is with him, he has this assurance that he's secure, that his future is sure. He doesn't have to be afraid. And he even talk about his cup overflowing and his head being anointed with oil. So even in difficult times, he feels the blessing because he knows God is with him through the hard times. Not to avoid the hard times, but through the hard times, God's with him and can give him some assurance there.
And he starts reflecting in verse 6 on the eternity that he's looking forward to, goodness and love following him all the days of his life, and being able to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The house of the Lord, that in the immediate context, that might have just been the temple, the place of worship. But David describes eternity here. It's something he's going to be doing forever. So it's not just a really long prayer session, a really long time of worship in a church or a temple. This is the eternal house of God, his eternal kingdom. He's looking forward to being with God in his presence unceasingly. And it's something Jesus kind of brings up. For instance, in the Gospel of John, in chapter 14, we see Jesus talking about how he's going to prepare a house, prepare rooms for his followers in God's house. So it's a wonderful comfort and hope to know that in the difficult times, God is there with us. But it's an even greater hope, I think, to know that when all of this is said and done, our days with God in his presence will be unnumbered. They'll be going on forever and ever. Yeah.
And of course, as we're thinking about Jesus, Jesus is obviously the ultimate fulfillment of this, because as much as David had an idea of God as his shepherd, it's when you get to Jesus that you see Jesus is the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. It gives his very self sacrificially. That's why you can trust him. That's why you know he cares for you. And then, of course, the final one in Revelation, chapter 7, verse 17, if I can just find that. These great words which talk about the shepherd being the lamb, because he's the lamb who looks like he's been slain, as you read earlier in the verses there. Lamb looking as though he'd been slain in Revelation 5. That's Jesus standing in the middle of the throne because he's God, but looking like he's been slain because he's the lamb who's sacrificed. And then in chapter 7, verse 17, the lamb at the centre of the throne will be their shepherd, and he'll lead them to springs of living water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. In other words, we'll be with the shepherd in eternity. And there will be no more tears, there'll be no more sadness, no more suffering, no more death. That's the promise, the rich promise that we have here in the book of Revelation. Great Psalm 23.
Yeah.
Let's just remind ourselves what's happening with youth. When do these changes? We're talking about year 6 and senior youth. When does all this happen?
Yeah, sure. So it'll be the start of term 4. So I believe the first night of the grade 6s coming along will be the 9th of October, the Friday, and the senior group's first night will be the 5th of October. First week of term 4.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Really looking forward to
Good
that.
days. Terrific. Well, that's a wrap, friends. Hope to see you Sunday. See you then.
See you then.